Duke Ellington's drummer, Sonny Greer, said of Django, "That cat could take a guitar and make it talk. Nobody played like him." Reinhardt is regarded as one of the greatest guitar players of all time, and the first important European jazz musician to make a major contribution with jazz guitar. He was a musician with an insatiable musical appetite and absorbed music like a sponge. He had incredible ears, an impeccable sense of timing, and a technique that, still today, many would envy. He set the bar extremely high, and one could arguably say that he was the first to explore the full potential of the guitar. He was born in a gypsy caravan and lived his young life on the outskirts of Paris in a disreputable area called La Zone, where the gypsies, in medieval tradition, gathered their caravans. Refusing to go to school, he grew up illiterate, a free spirit who roamed the streets with his brother and friends, stole chickens, went to the cinema, played billiards, and listened to music intently. Django Reinhardt's actual name was John. Django was the gypsy name his mother gave him when he was born, in a caravan on the road in Belgium. At the time, Romani families gave their babies a public name, John, and a private name, Django. Reinhardt was born on the 23rd of January 1910 into a French family of Romani descent. His French father, Jean-Eugène Weiss, lived in Paris and went by the name Jean-Baptiste Reinhardt, using his wife's surname to avoid the French military draft. His mother, Laurence Reinhardt, was a dancer. Reinhardt spent most of his youth in Romani encampments close to Paris, where he started playing the violin, banjo, and guitar. He was attracted to music at an early age, first playing the violin. At the age of 12, he received a banjo guitar as a gift. He quickly taught himself to play, mimicking the fingerings of musicians he watched. Reinhardt was able to make a living playing music by the time he was 15, mostly in cafes, often with his brother Joseph. At this time, he had not started playing jazz, although he had probably heard and had been intrigued by the version of jazz played by American expatriate bands. At the age of 17, Reinhardt married a girl from the same Romani settlement, although not an official marriage under French law. The following year, he recorded for the first time. On these recordings, made in 1928, Reinhardt played the banjo. His name was now drawing international attention, such as from British bandleader Jack Hilton, who came to France just to hear him play. Hilton offered him a job on the spot, and Reinhardt accepted. Before he had a chance to start with the band, Reinhardt nearly died. On the night of November 2nd, 1928, Reinhardt was going to bed in the wagon that he and his wife shared in the caravan. He knocked over a candle, which ignited the extremely flammable material that his wife used to make artificial flowers. The wagon was quickly engulfed in flames. The couple escaped, but Reinhardt suffered extensive burns over half his body. During his 18-month hospitalization, doctors recommended amputation of his badly damaged right leg. Reinhardt refused the surgery and was eventually able to walk with the aid of a cane. More crucial to his music, the fourth and fifth fingers, ring and little finger of Reinhardt's left hand were badly burned, fusing his pinky to the finger beside it and permanently curling both in. Doctors believed that he would never play guitar again. During many months of recuperation, Reinhardt retaught himself to play using primarily the index and middle finger of his left hand, using the two injured fingers only for chord work. Because of his fused fingers, Django could no longer play conventional chord shapes, but was able to play variants on these. Those modified chords gave his playing different shadings and an identifiable sound that was ahead of its time harmonically. He made use of a new 6-string steel-strung acoustic guitar that was bought for him by his brother, who was also an accomplished guitarist. Within a year of the fire in 1929, his wife gave birth to their son, Henry. Soon after, the couple split up. In the years after the fire, Reinhardt was rehabilitating and experimenting on the guitar that his brother had given him. After having played a broad spectrum of music, he was introduced to American jazz by an acquaintance. The first time he heard a Louis Armstrong record, he put his head in his hands and sobbed. Hearing their music triggered in Reinhardt a vision and goal of becoming a jazz professional. While developing his interest in jazz, Reinhardt met Stéphane Grappelli, a young violinist with similar musical interests. In 1934, Reinhardt and Grappelli formed the Quintet of the Hot Club of France. With their swinging fusion of American jazz, Romani rhythms, and Parisian street music, the quintet catapulted to worldwide fame with the genre they invented, Gypsy jazz. It became the most accomplished and innovative European jazz group of the period. During their most popular years, the tour schedule that Django and his quintet maintained was rigorous. Among the countries welcoming them were England, India, Australia, France, and Belgium. All of this activity was taking place despite the fact that World War II was raging across Europe, and there was a glut of American GIs haunting the clubs in the hopes of finding Django playing his music. Reinhardt also played and recorded with many American jazz musicians, such as Adelaide Hall, Coleman Hawkins, and Benny Carter. He participated in a jam session and radio performance with Louis Armstrong. Later in his career, Reinhardt played with Dizzy Gillespie in France. Reinhardt recorded over 900 sides in his recording career, from 1928 to 1953, the majority as sides of the then prevalent 78 RPM records. Only one session, 8 tracks, from March 1953 was ever recorded specifically for album release by Norman Granz, in the then new LP format. But Reinhardt died before the album could be released. Since his death, Reinhardt's music has been released on many compilations. Intégrale Django Reinhardt, volumes 120, 40 CDs, released by the French company Frémaux from 2002 to 2005, tried to include every known track on which he played. When World War II broke out, the original quintet was on tour in the United Kingdom. Reinhardt returned to Paris at once. While he tried to continue with his music, war with the Nazis presented Reinhardt with a potentially catastrophic obstacle, as he was a Romani jazz musician. Beginning in 1933, all German Romanis were barred from living in cities, herded into settlement camps, and routinely sterilized. Romani men were required to wear a brown Gypsy ID triangle sewn on their clothing, similar to the yellow Star of David that Jews had to subsequently wear. During the war, Romanis were systematically killed in concentration camps. In France, they were used as slave labor on farms and in factories. During the Holocaust, an estimated 600,000 to 1 million Romanis throughout Europe were killed. Reinhardt's first attempt at escape from occupied France led to capture. Fortunately for him, a jazz-loving German officer allowed him to return to Paris. Reinhardt made a second attempt a few days later, but was stopped in the middle of the night by Swiss border guards, who forced him to return to Paris again. Unlike the estimated 600,000 Romani people killed in the Romani Holocaust, he miraculously avoided being sent to one of the death camps that claimed so many lives. After the war, Reinhardt rejoined Grappelli in the UK. In the autumn of 1946, he made his first tour in the United States, debuting at the Cleveland Music Hall as a special guest soloist with Duke Ellington and his orchestra. He arrived without any luggage and had not bothered to bring his guitar along because he thought American companies making the instruments would vie for the honor of presenting him with one, which was far from true. He was disappointed that he was treated by the American jazz public as an unknown rather than as a celebrity, and he was often bored. At the end of the tour, Reinhardt played 2 nights at Carnegie Hall in New York City. He received a great ovation and took 6 curtain calls on the first night. Despite his pride in touring with Ellington, he was not fully integrated into the band. He played a few tunes at the end of the show, backed by Ellington, with no special arrangements written for him. After the tour, Reinhardt secured an engagement at Café Society Uptown, where he played 4 solos a day, backed by the resident band. These performances drew large audiences, but he played on a borrowed electric guitar, which he felt hampered the delicacy of his style. He had been promised jobs in California, but they failed to develop. Tired of waiting, Reinhardt left America for good and returned to France in February 1947. Although the American trip ended up being a semi-disaster, Reinhardt fell in love with the electric guitar and went back to France determined to play it from then on. Django explored both the electric guitar and bebop. while Reinhardt's solos and his new boppish originals were sometimes rhythmically awkward. As the 1940s progressed, he found his own voice in the new music, while retaining his trademark sound. Unknown to most Americans because most of his recordings were not widely available in the US, by 1949, Django Reinhardt was one of the finest of all bop guitarists. There were plans underway for him to return to the United States as part of Norman Granz's Jazz at the Philharmonic. But on May 16, 1953, the 43-year-old Django Reinhardt died suddenly from a stroke. And that is where the story normally would have ended. Years passed, and other than in the playing of Les Paul and Charlie Byrd, little of Reinhardt's style was heard in other guitarists. However, in 1973, Grappelli was persuaded by guitarist Diz Disley to lead a jazz string group, and the response was so favorable that the violinist toured the world in that setting. The comeback of Django Reinhardt's music had begun. What would eventually be called the Gypsy jazz movement really took off in the 1980s. Guitarist John Larson founded the Hot Club de Norvège, and his Hot Club label has since documented hundreds of swing sessions. A countless number of guitarists began to emulate Django Reinhardt's playing, particularly from the 1930s. The explosion of talent resulted in dozens of Hot Club groups being formed, and Django Reinhardt festivals becoming very popular. Gypsy jazz has become its own musical idiom in a world all its own. No other jazz musician, decades after his death, has received such a renaissance as Django Reinhardt. But then again, there was only one Django. This is Danny from One Track Jazz. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.